Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Dugan, and I'm the sales director for Bonita in North America. And I'm here today to host our Bonita Live Tour 2019 session. Today, here with our customer, Old Dominion University, with two people, Todd Dergenski and Natalie Metzger, who are going to talk about their automation project with Bonita and how they've managed to automate their processes, and especially student processes. So today's session, the format is going to be about a 25-30-minute interview with Natalie and Todd to talk about their projects. You will also be able during the session to ask your questions, and you can address them in the question box, and we're going to provide the answers for a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. And I will also take about 10-15 minutes to talk to you about the Bonita platform. Now back to you, Natalie and Todd. Hi to both of you.
Hello.
Hello.
Great, thanks for joining. So before we talk in depth about your project and what you've done around automation, can you briefly introduce yourself and tell us what Old Dominion University does?
My name is Natalie Metzger. I work as a middleware software engineer in the identity management team.
I am Todd Dergenski. I am the Assistant Information Security Officer for Identity Management, Middleware, and ERP Security. Old Dominion University is a research college. We have around, don't think these are official numbers, but around 25,000 students, several thousand faculty, staff, and we process. Our group specifically interacts with their accounts and management of those accounts, handling new employees, new students, terminating employees, or students that have left the university or graduated, as well as quite a few other areas involving middleware, data delivery, APIs, those kind of things.
And so can you tell us what was the situation a few years back before having BPM platforms such as Bonita? What was the situation and what challenges were you facing?
Sure. We are the accounts management team. Our accounts flow is very cyclical in that at the beginning of the semester, we get inundated with account requests for new employees or new students. And it quadruples, if not more, our daily workload. And all of these used to come in on paper, meaning that when a new employee is hired, they'd have to go to the department, they'd have to sign the document, they'd have to have somebody in the department sign the document. And then that would get sent over through campus mail. That would get to us. We would record that we received it and begin to process it. For some services, it actually expanded out further, where we had to get other people to approve their access. If you're going to be looking at billing, or if you're going to be looking at classes, or like if you're going to be looking at classes, our registrar has to sign off on that. And that would end up expanding out how long it took to do a request. Our normal SLA is 3 business days for account requests. And during the paper one, people would fill out the sheet of paper and think that the clock started right then. For the more involved requests, we don't even put an SLA on them. We tell them it's kind of done when it's done, because again, some of these things have to be signed off by 13, 14 people. And it was causing a lot of angst. It was causing a lot of where is this? It caused a lot of duplications. And again, we would go through, especially certain times of the year, we would end up processing hundreds of these a day. So that's kind of where we started, and that was the problem I dropped off on Natalie's desk. How do we solve this? How do we make this automated? How do we handle these kind of situations, or how can we improve this? And that's what kind of led us to Bonita.
And Natalie, so when you head over that topic to Natalie, were you part of the evaluation group? How did you guys do your evaluation in finding the best solution, the right solution for your automation project?
Well, back then there weren't too many products out there, if I remember right, and I did the evaluation. And I had the constraint that I had to have something at first. It needed to be open source as well.
Okay.
So I evaluated 3 products, one of them Bonita, and the 2 others had huge problems installing. So I went with Bonita, and never looked back. Bonita just, fit the mold.
The criteria I gave her was one, open source, so that we could run it without, that way we could evaluate it prior to going live, as well as we could make any modifications that were necessary, if necessary, to the product. But also that support was a possibility. That was a big thing for us, as well as the ability to, for us, it was we're a Java shop, so preferably something in Java, or at least something that I could reuse a lot of the skills on. If not Java, then Java akin.
Got it. And then when you selected Bonita Soft, so then how did you tackle and start the overall project? What was the team that you had, or how did you start saying, okay, now we have to do it, and we have, X number of processes? Where did you start?
Well, the team was basically me, and I think I started just with learning how the process flow works, tested a couple of simple things, and
we began to dissect the account request flow and trying to break it into various stages and constituent parts, and really taking a look at what was occurring with the paper. And then with each of those components, seeing if we could identify an authoritative source for that kind of information, as well as could we automate it? How could we build it? How could we express this to people? So we began to look at our overall flow and just breaking it, our overall problem, and then breaking it into stages, and then looking deep into each of those stages, into how we could show that stage, how we could flow that, or how we could move that stage through a flow. What data did that stage need in order to move forward? It was quite of an involved process. Again, Natalie was primary on this. She handled the workflows and really came up with a very generic workflow that we've been able to. I honestly don't think our workflow has fundamentally changed since we started. That process is, even today, still fairly sound. The data underneath will change, but the overall flow in the what you have on the screen there hasn't actually changed much since we've had to release it.
No, I only added minor details, I think, but mostly it was making sure that the process works through all possible approvals, including delegation, and then go to our account managers who actually create the account, and also make sure if there's more than the account manager involved, that it will go to other IT groups to perform any additional setup.
And so what was the timeline, and how quickly, or how long did it take you to push the account request process into production?
Our normal project cycle is 3 to 4 months. I believe I gave Natalie about 6 months to kind of work on this, while she was tackling the workflow issues and identifying the data elements that she was needing. We would then begin to work on a couple of other members of the team would begin to work on finding data sources for that, solidifying those data sources. In some cases, it became a bit of you help me and I'll help you with some departments. We building an entire management interface for our finance department so that we could use their data, but they were desperate in need for some UI work, or some management work. But we kind of went through and tried to see where we could reuse a lot of the components around the university and those data elements, and really solidifying them as best we can.
Yeah. In terms of elements that you say, reusability, what were the components or aspects of the developments that you reused and maybe speed up for the next processes and next deployments?
Right, so we built an entire rights tracking system where we have in the system all our approvers, all our delegates, all the objects that you can possibly request. And you have those in there.
As well as the various stages of approvers. For us, we refer to them as budget unit directors. These are kind of the not only fiscal, but generally speaking, the department chairs or departmental managers in the various units. We were able to build that and build the data, solidify those data feeds for that. And believe it or not, we've actually used those same data feeds or same ways that we're resolving that in numerous other products and numerous other workflows outside of the one we're referring to that you have on the screen here. So we've been able to reuse a lot of the stuff or a lot of the things that we did for the online account request. We've been able to use in other workflows.
And so, how many processes have you been able to build on Bonita today after the account request? Where are you today after a few years of experience at Bonita?
Right, so I have the account request process, which is actually comprised of 6 workflows. I do have a account termination workflow. We do have a department change workflow. We have one of our password recovery workflows in there, 2 notification workflows. And then on a different subject, we also do have a project where people can request changes to their online directory profile. So that means the way when you search on the university's website for their name and what they do at the university. We have 5 processes there, so they can request changes. Let's say their title in the system has some sort of abbreviation and they want to have it spelled out. And then they can request it through there. It also goes, like the account request, through approvals. Depending on what they're requesting, it goes to different parties. So we were able to reuse our whole rights management system there.
And that actually got sped up quite a lot because we did the initial work with the online account request. The data pulls for the various approvers and those kind of things had already been built, established, and tested. So we were able to reuse a lot of those in these additional flows.
And how you and are you reporting or sharing the operations of your different processes internally? How is it seen by management or by the different managers and people who want to guarantee that the processes and services are up and running? How is that the Bonita soft or the automation seen or shared internally? Do you see it as more as a backbone as the IT system and no one knows that it's working and it's there? Or is it something that you feel is quite visible and people know whether it's Bonita soft or whether it's thanks to the workflow automation and business process management system that you were able to build such systems?
That's an interesting question. When we first started Bonita Soft, there was a lot of resistance to even running it for even our own product. At the time, there were a couple of other workflows that were coming online because every product has a workflow. But there were a couple of other workflows being established, and there was a question of why aren't we using theirs that we had to navigate. As time went on, we've actually spent quite a bit of time abstracting the users away from Bonita directly. So we have an entire dedicated an entire dedicated website that hosts the user experience. And there's really not a whole lot of telltale signs that they're using Bonita. Now, as time has gone on with this, the internal staff or the internal department workflows change, and at this point, they're actually evaluating whether or not they want to get rid of their workflows and move to Bonita. So there's been some talk relating to are their workflows actually doing what we've been able to do? Because we've been able to handle all kinds of situations and cases that they've been struggling with.
Yeah, and so how do you see your next steps or your next projects around automation? I heard you and Natalie said that the process fairly don't change much other than sometimes that maybe a few systems here and there. Do you have new processes or new projects to ramp up, or is it mostly again maintaining and making sure that you could adapt quickly to the changes of the existing processes?
Well, I think there's 2 areas, or there's 3 things that we're heading down. One is just simple expansion. We have an online account request that can now that as of as I think last year is now able handling anything that the person could put on paper. So we're in the middle of transitioning the university away from paper onto the online account request, and at this point we're above 80% electronic.
Okay.
Our next steps is specifically around automation. Our workflow is primarily based around the idea of routing the request to the account managers. And the area that we've begun to expand into is actually having the workflow take action and doing these things without the account managers having to intervene. So that way our ticket times go from being completed in less than 24 hours are now being completed in minutes, assuming that all approvals are done.
Yeah.
So really expanding out because we're a university, so we have at this point our account manager has to specifically know how to interact and deal with accounts in about 50 to 60 different systems. We have actually over several hundred systems that we interact with, but we've done various levels of automation with them. So it's really about trying to minimize that 50 that she has to directly interact with down further and further, because it's just going to keep growing. The last area that we're going to be expanding into actually has to deal with reuse. A lot of our workflows are internally they're generic, but they're not necessarily exposed as individual parts. For example, our departmental management flow is defined as a separate entity in our workflows, but we want to expose that as a separate and distinct workflow that can be called. So that way, if an application or an application developer wants to have departmental manager approval, there's a place where they can submit the department and this thing needs to be approved and just have something take care of it. And that's what we're looking at expanding into. So opening it up to other university developers to just natively hook into our existing Bonita.
Interesting. And have you considered looking into or using BonitaSoft as maybe an exposed service for orchestration in some cases, or are you calling BonitaSoft through other applications through APIs, for instance?
Right now, we're doing both. We have applications that are interacting with Bonita. Right now, our termination workflow interacts with our workflow, and they communicate back and forth the current state of things. And like I said, as you were saying there with the orchestration, that's part of the automation I was referring to with as long as all things are done or as long as all approvals are in and they're all approved and they need these things, go ahead and Bonita create them. We're letting Bonita go forth and creating things for people. That'll be expanding into more services. And the more and more we have, the less our account manager has to physically touch, which means the more new things she can handle.
No, exactly. No, and I was asking because I know I see it's in trend today on the market and with our customers as one, of course, to use the engine more than, of course, the entire application, with the process modeling and the business data model and the UI, but they really want to have, microservices or an exposed service architecture because sometimes they can, integrate with the enterprise bus systems and stuff like that. So I see also that the more automation, even into a workflow, the more you can embed it into a service, of course, guaranteeing and ensuring that you have the right tasks, then the easier it is instead of having, people to do all the tasks again in the application directly.
Correct.
Yeah. And so from your experience, Natalie and Todd, with BonitaSoft and automation projects in general, what maybe advice or challenges you could say or share things that you want to share your experience and maybe give some relevant advice to companies who are maybe right at the beginning of their automation journey or somewhere before to, from just sharing experience and telling what maybe do's and don'ts about, starting automation in general.
Well, I would say first make sure you know your business processes, that they're clearly defined. Otherwise, it is very, very hard to automate them. So, because if you get changes every hours, that makes it really hard to automate things. So with your business units, make sure it's defined and, the general flow and the default flow, and we all know there will be exceptions, but even those can mostly be defined. So I think that's my major advice for this. Then for the use of Bonita, I will say it is very intuitive. It's not something where I would say anybody with some sort of technical knowledge needs a lot of advice. For me, it came fairly naturally using the studio and then attaching whatever kind of other systems I needed to communicate with.
For us, I'll expand upon that. To give an example, we started our workflow with the Community Edition, and just due to our fiscal cycles, we were able to acquire Bonita Enterprise I think it was 3 months after we had started the project. Getting the enterprise license actually included training. By the time we were able to get the enterprise license and training, Natalie sat down with the trainer, and instead of training, they actually just reviewed what she did. She had it all up and running. They were just kind of going over best practices and what she had done and that kind of thing. So in the span of going from nothing to, I think it was less than 3-4 months, she had gotten to the point where she didn't need the training at all. They were just kind of reviewing things.
And
I would expand.
Sorry, Todd. Just and I'll let you, of course, share the last
Yeah.
feedback. But just on that point, Natalie or the team, did you get any help from external consultants, either from Bonita Soft or from an external partner to get things up and running, or you give the whole project to Natalie, say you have to make it work, and Natalie, what was your thought or situation when you had to do everything, or if you have to do everything, if you didn't have any help?
Well, no, there was no external help other than looking up your documentation on the internet.
We're the middleware team is kind of an enclave, and we were using our own, developing our own workflow. And again, we started off with the Community Edition just because of the way the fiscal cycles work. And it just ended up being that there was nobody else around here to go to. Even the workflow that they were asking if we could use, they hadn't even developed one yet. They were still in their they were still very early on in the development cycle. So Natalie was very, very early on, or learning workflows in general on this campus, but also specifically, she was the only one learning Bonita. Now she's an experienced Java developer, as well as she's used to what we describe as my one-line project plans. Go automate the online account request, and what does that mean, and kind of working through it. But she's been able to take that and just kind of work the problem and just keep working at it. And like I said, she had a functional workflow inside of 3-4 months, starting from effectively nothing. So it was very impressive, I have to admit. Going back to the lessons learned, I would say exception handling is something I cannot emphasize enough, for fault handling, making sure that as someone who deals with our workflows, for example, can be very fuzzy as far as what people are requesting, but understanding that people may not request the right thing or need to change things, or somebody's on vacation for a month and you need to route that somewhere else. So problem handling and fault handling are extremely important. And the last thing I would say is make sure that you really investigate your flow itself. You may not be able to automate everything to start, but see what you can build into the workflow, see what you can design, and begin to bring that online. That'll help you get some real experience, some real data flowing through, and to really see what's moving across the wire, and then make your adjustments. And once you solve one problem, the next problem becomes a little bit easier.
Yeah, and to that feedback, it might be a difficult question to answer, but how are you able to define or measure which process can be automated versus another one? And like you say, because you mentioned that not all use cases or not all processes are best candidates for workflow. It is I guess it's not easy to know, but how would you measure or know that you can or cannot automate this
Well,
process?
I'd make the argument that, at least for us, there's nothing that really can't be put into a workflow or automated. It really comes down to priority. And this whole project started with a single account manager who literally knew every approver on campus in her head. And the whole project was to basically automate what was in her head. So we ended up having to, and so none of it, there wasn't a whole lot of it that was written down, or a whole lot of it that was in a data source that could be interrogated. So we ended up having to go through, find these data sources, and just kind of work the problem. And when one didn't exist, we had to create it. But we've been able to kind of go through and identify these things, go through slowly. There's nothing I would say that we probably couldn't automate, but it would take time and milestones. And do you reach the finish line, 4 months from when you start? Probably not, but are you at least in the race?
I see. So it's more about, like you say, how well do you know, or how well are your process documented, and how easy it is then to be able to address it.
I'm willing to bet that most processes are not documented to the degree that are actually necessary. And it's probably not just our universities. That's probably a global thing.
Oh, yeah. Oh, definitely. And to conclude the interview, I don't know if Natalie or Todd, do you have any else to share, anything else to add?
I will say I really do enjoy working with Bonita for the simple reason that it works. It sounds maybe a bit outlandish, but to have this reliance where I don't have to think about it, where the engine is running in the background and it runs, this is actually a great relief.
At this point, our Bonita process actually handles enough of the account requests to be considered or almost a full-time employee. So we've been able to leverage it as a way of countering the fact that we're not getting an extra full-time employee.
I see what you mean. Yeah. Well, I think it's a great feedback, and I want to thank you both. And it is impressive to see someone as Natalie, of course, having the skills for Java or being a developer per se, but tackling a product, just following the training and being able to deliver the project on her own. That's why I was asking, because I think it's an important aspect. I don't think there's a success organization team say, okay, you should have a full team of developers, or it should be one that has this and this skills. But it's great to know that someone with the right skills and the right mindset can also be able to address and use Bonita as, and we know business process management, just the core process and the complexity of processes per se are difficult, but being able to use a BPM platform and make it work in a few months, and having after a few years now several processes and being happy, I think it's the best feedback that you can share to us as the vendor, but also to other prospects and customers. So thanks to both of you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. We are going to take a few minutes now to address a couple questions. So you mentioned that you had an ecosystem of hundreds, if not more than 50 or over 100 systems. What are the different information systems or different applications that you did connect Bonita with?
Primarily, we are, if anybody's familiar with higher education applications, we are what's called a banner school. It's a product from Lucian. We leverage their ERP as well as SIS system. We also have some ancillary systems that handle ancillary business systems that handle specific business tasks like onboarding of employees and that kind of thing. Bonita is currently interacting with our homegrown identity management system, as well as the ERP system, the finance system, as well as the student system, and the various workflows that would come from that. We're looking at, we also have it interacting with our ticketing system in order to basically use that to notify people, or to at least create a public or a more researchable presence for our help desk.
Okay. And the second question is, how can Bonita be used by business analysts and developers? I don't know if Natalie, you can share from your experience. Do you rather have to be a developer, or can business analyst or business developer use Bonita?
Well, I solely come from the developer standpoint, and in this case, for my specific requirements, there were a lot of development aspects to the whole process. But I would also say, if you have a business analyst, that those people should be perfectly well capable just designing the flows, how it should work, and then depending on what your use case is, have a developer to implement different features of that workflow.
Yeah, and I'll complete your answer as well. And we have that question very often. I'd say that for Bonita often positioning, it's a collaboration between business analysts and developers. So business analysts are the one who know their processes, or who would, with Bonita, be able to model the processes. But as soon as it's going to come to customization or integration, this is where you would need a developer, and with more specifically with Bonita, the Java developer.
Correct.
And so the third question, I believe, is going to be for me, is what are the different editions of Bonita available? So I'll talk about two. The major differences for the Bonita product is the open source community version that I talked about, which is free and available on our website that anyone can use, and that also helps anyone who wants to developer and use processes and BPM as a great start. And even though it does not have some capabilities, as we mentioned, the first one is the vendor support and customer support. There is no technical limitations per se to be able to use the product. And it's just a question of, do we want to build more, or do we want to gain time the reusability or complexity of more of bigger projects, and therefore they would consider the enterprise. But the community version is also great. And the second that we talked about, and that our customers and Old Dominion University is using, is our enterprise community product as well. And we only have one edition that includes all the capabilities, and some that we talked about today, except the Bonita add-ons that are specific needs for a project. And I think this is all for the questions. So I'm going to conclude. I want to thank everyone for joining the session today of our Bonita live tour, especially thanks to you, Todd and Natalie. It was for us a new format. So it was a fourth and final session of interview of the week of the Bonita live tour 2019. I really hope that, and I found the interview very interesting and valuable for customer feedback and sharing their experience as well. The slides and the presentation will be shared to the participants by email shortly, but also the 4 different recordings and sessions are all available on the website. And other customers that we interviews were Bristol Myers Squibb, McGill Healthcare University, and Hunter Douglas. And of course, with here today, Old Dominion University. So thanks again, Todd and Natalie. It was great talking with both of you, and I hope to talk to you guys soon.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.